Hey YouTube, it's your girl Dr. J, and first, sorry about my hair. It's drying, so you guys can see all my conditioner and everything like that as it dries. But what I wanted to do is come and do a quick video on what we are doing for U.S. history. And the way that we're doing U.S. history is we're doing history extremely slowly. We're taking our time with each phase of U.S. history, and we're also doing world history as well and mixing it with geography. But I wanted to just show you guys what we're doing for early U.S. history right now. I decided to let us really take our time and go through history slowly so that my kids have a deep understanding of it, and also so that we can hit it from a lot of different perspectives. And for U.S. history, I thought that was extremely important. So what we're using as our spine is a history of the U.S. By Joy Hawking, and I like it. It's a very good scope and sequence, so I really like using it as a scope and sequence. And this is the first book. It's prehistory through 1600, and right now we are still at the very early prehistory. So what I'm doing is also using books like this. This is Rethinking Columbus, the next 500 years, and it's resources for teachers about the impact of the arrival of Columbus on the Americas. So this is an excellent book. It gives you great ideas for how to teach history from a more indigenous perspective and take it from, not what happened from the explorer's perspective, but what happened from the perspective of the indigenous people who encountered Columbus. We're using by Ronald Takaki, A Different Mirror, A History of Multicultural America. And this one is the book for young people. I have the book that's written for adults as well, but it's just really good. It's packed with great information. The book for young people is great as a read aloud, and it just allows you to see the United States and the history of the U.S. from the perspective of the various different groups that are here right now, how everybody got here, how everybody came, and then what has U.S. history looked at like through their eyes. Howard Zinn's A Young People's History of the United States. Again, Howard Zinn, his book really looks at U.S. history from a more diverse perspective. So it's not just one perspective, but it is what has U.S. history looked at like from the perspective of all the different groups that call the United States home right now. And he also has a extremely well done website that has a lot of teaching resources on it as well. This is my fave. It is Lies My Teacher Told Me, Everything Your American History Textbook Got Wrong. And it's by James Lowen. And it's just really good to put U.S. history in perspective. And he's really good at pointing you to resources that give a fuller picture of the U.S. history story than what we tend to find in some traditional textbooks. And also, because you guys know my kids really like horrible history, horrible math, horrible science. So this is Horrible Histories USA, and it's Horrible Histories is probably the most cynical perspective you can look at history from, a kid's point of view. So we have their entire collection as well as their entire collection of DVDs. They don't do a lot on U.S. history. Most of their work is on European history, and they do some ancient civilizations as well. But I just really like their work because it's kind of fun. And because we are right now at very early U.S. history, ancient U.S. history, basically, we're doing, we have already finished this series. This is Kaya, an American Girl series. We read the whole series. My kids loved this series. We actually loved Addie too, and I'll give you guys that once we get a little further down in U.S. history, because we actually already read the Addie series as well. But this series is very well done. Boys will like it as well as girls because of the way it's written and some of the adventure and stuff that's in it. I have not read the entire American Girl genre, but from people that have read it, they said that Kaya and Addie are probably the best written of the entire series. But this is a great book for looking at a native perspective or an indigenous perspective of kind of a historical fiction. So we read that. This we're doing excerpts from They Came Before Columbus, The African Presence in Ancient America by Ivan van Sertima. We're also going to be watching Trail of Tears, this video series. This is a DK book on the Aztec, Inca, and Maya. This book is called More Than Moccasins, a kid's activity guide to traditional North American Indian life. And this book is called America's Black Founders, and it's kind of more for revolution. So we haven't used this a lot because we're not at this phase of history yet. So this will probably be pulled out once we get to a little further from early U.S. history. And then another thing that we did was the Kaya book and the Addie book. They really inspired my kids to want to kind of know their personal history. And in order to really inspire that, what my husband and I did was we took DNA tests. We took DNA tests through Ancestry.com, and we are talking about our own personal journey to the Americas with the kids as well. And it was actually really interesting to take the test and get the results, because the results were kind of surprising on both of our ends. You get to see, how your family lore aligns up with what science and technology is telling you. And so that was one kind of interesting component. And another interesting component was just how different my husband's and my DNA-based ancestry was, where my husband had quite a significant amount of his DNA traced his ancestry to one particular country on the continent of Africa, a West African country, whereas my DNA history was a little bit more diverse, where I had some West African countries, but I also had some Central African and South African countries in my DNA, and I did not have none of my DNA had a very strong one particular country. So that was kind of interesting because and we did it because a lot of times when people talk about, oh, well, the slaves came over from Africa. But Africa is a continent. It's very diverse, and we wanted the kids to get a perspective of, kind of what their ancestral lineage was like. So as we got our DNA results, we've been collecting various books on that, our kind of lineages. So we got, this is a book on Ghana, and this book is from Enchantment of the World series, and I actually got a ton of their books, and I'll show you these when I do a video on how my son is doing geography, because I got pretty much as much of the series as I can get at a reasonable price used. So this is Ghana. This one is Nigeria. This is another book, A World of Food, from Nigeria. And this is a history series that my son has been doing with geography. And so we have been looking at the book on Nigeria to go along with kind of our walk. And let me see. I don't have some of the other books around me, but pretty much all the books, all the kind of DNA strands that we have, we are kind of tracing those and getting resources on those so the kids can see kind of those perspectives of what some of their ancestors were doing in some of these various places that we've come from. So that's a really good, that's been really fulfilling, because my kids were really they had a lot of questions about, what was their history, and to be able to talk to them about their history is really fulfilling. It also, there's other places. I think my DNA strands, I had such a diverse DNA strand that I had DNA from like 5 of the 7 continents, and considering the fact that there's one of those 7 continents is not inhabited, there was, like, the only place that I didn't have DNA from was Australia. So that was, it was interesting to have, DNA from North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa. So that was really interesting. So we've been getting books on those things. Oh, here's one on the Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo. And so like I said, what we're doing now is we're just kind of hanging out in ancient U.S. history and kind of looking at it from the indigenous perspective, and we're walking our way through, kind of what was the United States, the place that the United States now sits. What was that like in early history? And we're doing a lot of videos like America Before Columbus and a lot of different things like that, so we can see not only from a people perspective but kind of from a nature perspective, what was America like, and then what was this land like from the indigenous tribes, just learning just about the different tribes, and then looking at, okay, well, when Columbus came, what was that like from the various perspectives, and talking about how Columbus's arrival started the transatlantic slave trade and that sort of stuff. And then also, when slaves came, not kind of saying, oh, they came from Africa, but where did they come? What were the African countries that slaves were brought from? What was their life like then? What's it like in those places now? And just having them have a much more full experience. Also, looking at things like we're looking at Mexico, because again, we have a lot of indigenous tribes that are here. They are very similar ancestrally to a lot of indigenous tribes that are what is and now considered Mexico and different things like that. So it's just a really great experience to kind of dig deep. We've been able to even look at some stuff in Asia because of the land bridge, which is where they believe the first people that came to the land that is now United States actually came across a land bridge from Asia. And so it's just really nice to be able to take our time through U.S. history and learn it from a broad perspective and appreciate all the different experiences, the good, the bad, and the ugly, understand them, and get informed for ourselves on the journey. So this is one of the things that, history was one of the things that I was the most scared about, because I wanted my kids to have a good, true perspective, but I didn't want to, create bitterness or frustration or anger. And so being able to find really good resources that allows us to take a truthful look at history and learn from it, and also appreciate people and not just gloss over things. We try not to just talk about, oh, the Indians, oh, the Native Americans, but really look at the various tribes and what it was like living in the various places along the entire North American continent, and not just saying, oh yes, slaves were brought from Africa, but taking our time and getting to know the various countries that were affected by the transatlantic slave trade and what that meant for them, and how that experience and how their experiences were different here, and then how that kind of shared experience became what we now see as an African American experience. So this has been fun. My kids are really enjoying it. Even the tough spots, they're really, really enjoying. So I've been really happy with it. And after we finish kind of our ancient or indigenous U.S. history perspective, we're going to move on to more of those late 1600s, early 1700s, and 1800s, and dig more into that sort of history. And I'll come back and show you guys what are some of the resources we're going to be using for those as well. This is Dr. J. Hope this helps, and I'm out. Bye-bye.